Good to go.
Okay, excellent. Well, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You bet. So before we get into your work of therapy and recovery and the great things that you're doing, I want to know first and foremost, probably one of the biggest things that caused levels of trauma and change in our lives was going through that pandemic 4.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So how much of living through that and dealing with that part of our lives has influenced your work today?
Yeah, a lot. I think, first and foremost, I always like to see kind of the silver lining. And with that pandemic happening, there's a huge shift. So people are recognizing that what was happening before in their lives isn't working now. A lot of isolation was happening. A lot of people, querying like what's next, feeling a lot of unsafety. And then kind of looking to see getting their f feet back on the ground, looking for that stabilization, looking for ways to kind of move forward with like a meaningful life. And that's kind of the neat part about the anytime a big shift happens in the world is that people kind of leave it being like, thank goodness I'm alive. What's next for me? Thank goodness, I have family and friends who are alive. What's next for us? And then you have the other half who unfortunately have lost loved ones who then are kind of trying to find a new normal in life. Life looks very different than before and after. There's a lot of, anger that still exists after having some people getting vaccination and some people not getting vaccinations and the divide that happened among those groups. So there's a lot of different types of trauma that resulted from the pandemic. But definitely there also is that silver lining of people wanting to live a life after the pandemic, which is always nice to see as well. The pandemic did shift how I do my job. Even today, with us meeting virtually, huge silver lining, right? These Zoom, everyone wasn't so familiar with Zoom. Having, sessions online wasn't always something people, preferred or even knew was an option. So there was this huge shift also around the stigma. Like everyone needed support during the COVID. And reaching out, whether it was through a therapist by Zoom or a loved one by Zoom, it did make our world actually closer with having these online technologies. And so you're seeing agencies also start to develop technology to make people feel connected, which I thought was kind of a neat silver lining as well.
There was that proverbial fork in the road where people had to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, whether they liked their jobs, the people they're
Yeah.
around, the people they're married to, all of those things. And in that process, do you think that people unearthed traumas they may have buried? Do you think there was kind of a revelatory level of human consciousness that happened?
Yeah, well, and then kind of what you're acknowledging as well is that people in isolation sometimes bring up their worst, right? And so there's a lot of addiction. There was a lot of domestic violence that happened. There was a lot of, people recognizing that, hey, the person that they're with may not be who they want to be with anymore after the COVID. So, or after kind of being isolated with certain people and that kind of thing. So definitely people had a bit of a self-reflective moment of being with themselves for that long. And so that was kind of for many, like a wake up call, and kind of as you're mentioning, like finding meaning in life.
Well, I think about historically in the world in the 20s after the Spanish flu, there seemed to be kind of this resurgence of art and arts and culture, especially with, well, like I mentioned with jazz, like that was when things started really kind of coming alive and the economy started growing. So it almost seems like the world, Mother Nature needs to put us on some level of pause so that we can recalibrate and figure out what we're doing with our lives.
I absolutely love that. This idea of like a reset based on like, yeah, like what is meaningful in life? What matters in life? And when you're talking about the things that bring us joy, a lot of it is, music. A lot of it is art, like visual, stimulation to make us feel at ease. Even this idea of like nature, like getting off our computers, getting outside, fresh air. That was one thing that, people kind of were going a bit, cabin fever, stir crazies, being locked up inside. And so we're seeing the value of getting outside, walking in nature, being in the sun, putting your feet on the ground and in the forest. Like these are all things that we started to recognize as being healing.
So your title, there's a host of acronyms, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of therapeutic services you provide along with being an author. But if I was to boil this down to its elements and put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, let's say they're 10 or 11 years old, it's career day, and the kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" What's your
Yeah.
answer?
So I love that. And I love the idea of like, what do I do for a living? Well, I work with people to kind of find what makes them feel good about who they are. I kind of just will do a little plug. So I have a
Yeah.
book called Finding Your Purpose. Basically a guidebook to a more meaningful life. And then, when I work with anyone, it's kind of this idea of like we all have something that we're searching for, whether it's purpose, whether it's meaning, whether it's for love, attachment, self-fulfillment, something, right? We're all kind of looking for something. And so what I do is I help people find what their something is. And whether their something is, a passionate career that they really want, or whether it is self-love, or whether it is, a hobby or something, like we're all looking for something. And that's kind of, looking at life. And whether we're, 10, whether we're 20, whether we're 30, whether we're 40, that purpose is going to look different. And that's kind of the cool part about it too, is that we're always in this ongoing search for meaning in life. And whether the meaning will be to be, a middle school graduate, or maybe the meaning will then be to find your career, then a meaning will be to find, the spouse, and then a meaningful career will be to be a parent. There's always some type of movement forward that looks for meaning in our lives, and that's kind of the neat part about being alive.
So, I'm a Libra, so inherently there's this level of balance that's woven into my DNA. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, with everything that you're talking about in your book about meaning, is it always, is there a focus on equilibrium? Is there a focus on finding equanimity with all of it?
Yeah, and so this idea of like balance in life, and kind of going back to even like wellness, right? Like this idea that if you're really physically well, and if you're running half marathons every day, and you're eating the best food and all this kind of stuff, like that is one balancing part, this pillar of wellness, right? This idea of you can't live in isolation with, having a great body and eating great food. Like that's not really a meaningful life, right? For some that might feel like a purpose, but then there's other parts that kind of connect us to what feels good. And whether that is attachment, whether that is like us making meaningful relationships with that social lens, or whether that is, if we're, doing a lot of physical stuff and we're not nearly necessarily nurturing our emotional or our, mental or even our spiritual side of things, we need balance. And so I love that you brought that up in this idea of self-care. That is part of that meaningful life. And not that I'm plugging my second book, but looking at this idea of finding your wellness is really that equilibrium. Is kind of what you're mentioning, this idea of incorporating the things that matter and making sure there's balance, because you can't be all in with one and then forget about the rest.
So before we leave career day, I'm going to put you in the third grade and
Okay.
ask you, what did you want to be? What was your dream life? What did you want to be when
Oh,
you grew
that's
up?
so funny. I don't even remember. I think I wanted to be like a marine biologist or a veterinarian.
Yeah.
And then, as I grew, I realized that I cannot do body fluids and I cannot do blood and guts. And so, this idea of a marine biologist studying marine life, and then this idea of a vet studying animals that are, it wasn't going to work out for me. So, instead of me being like, oh, life's over, can't be what I wanted to be, you pivot, right? And then you
Yeah.
adapt and you kind of start to see what your strengths are. And my strengths were talking. My strengths were being with people, not animals so much. I love animals, but that's not really where my career was going.
So take me back to where you were born and raised. What were these foundational elements of getting into therapy that got woven in to this career and this life that you have now?
That's a great question. So, I am a first generation Canadian. My mother is an immigrant. She came from Estonia, believe it or not. So,
Okay.
very interesting backstory. Being raised definitely very low income, did her best. Her mom did her best. We kind of started out, with a little bit of domestic violence in her background that kind of then trickled through with her kids. Left, had three young ones, one with a physical disability, two, I'm very ADHD, high neurodivergent, very kind of struggling with a lot of her own things, and definitely was a strong role model. So did her best to get us through, went back to school later on in life. I kind of saw this woman who was very, powered to make life better for her kids and herself, whether it was moving like to different country or what, but just to see that fight. Not everyone has that kind of a role model. And so when I was going through school, definitely pushed back on her, did all I could to kind of be a really tough child to manage, and just to kind of see that like unrelentless love and unrelentless support, and just kind of keep showing up for me. Um, a lot of kids don't get that, and so moving through this career, I started working with children and youth, and really started to be that person to say like, hey, what do you want to tell yourself in 10 years from now? Because that's kind of the message that I was able to get when I was growing up. So someone to really help me figure out, where I was going through it all. So it is just idea of giving back. I was very privileged to kind of have education in my background, because, my mom tried so hard to make her life better. She definitely funded a lot of my school episodes and whatnot. So I kind of was very lucky to get the upbringing that I got, but I also recognize the privilege that is behind that. And seeing kind of the strength and the tenacity and the resiliency, it also reminded me that like everyone can get through hard things. And then as I'm learning more, I start to know that I actually know less. And so the more I learn, the more kind of cool things come up around like how we're actually meant to heal ourselves, whether it's through trauma, whether it's through getting a broken bone, whether it's through, broken skin or even like a virus. Like we're all our bodies are made to fight, and that's kind of when you combine the knowledge around our body fighting with the mind fighting, breath can heal body, mind can heal body. Mind could heal mind. So it's really amazing when you kind of see what's out there. Not everyone knows that. So just wanting
So
to share that message.
yeah, no, no, no. I totally dig it. So let me ask you this. On the one hand, to excel, and on the other hand, to heal in this life, you have to have inspirational forces that are behind you. Who has
Yeah.
that been for you? Who's been the heroic force behind you?
Yeah. My mom, I love how you take my really long rant and rant and turn it into a sentence. So great. Thank you for that. We make a good team. Yeah. So my mom has been a phenomenal kind of role model for me to kind of watch and see. And I've had a lot of really great mentors throughout my life. When I was doing my PhD in social work, Dr. Dennis Bracken, huge, amazing human being. And then just always like people believing in me. And that I think is something that I've been really lucky to come across great humans who say, hey, you can do anything you put your mind to. And that's the truth that I've grown up with is that you actually can achieve anything. And that's something that I try my best to share with everyone. So, whether it's someone who's, not doing so great in grade eight, it's like, well, you know what? There's a lot of great years left to come. Like don't be so hard on yourself right now. Someone who's not doing so great in university, hey, it's like, you know what? There's a lot of great things left to come. Wherever you're at in life, there's still a lot of great years left to come. And that's kind of the message that I've always gotten and I want to share with others as well.
So, if you can meet one person alive on the planet that's really overcome a lot, that's achieved everything they wanted, an inspirational person,
Oh,
hang out
yeah.
with them, someone that might help you on your journey, who would you love to meet and hang out with?
I have been reading a lot of Sonia Choquette. She talks a lot. It's kind of like a very side turn right now we're gonna do. She talks a lot about spirit guides and where I'm one area that I'm really strong in is academics, and I'm really strong, physical fitness, really strong with emotional fitness. But my spirituality is kind of like, well, we don't know yet. So she's really much into intuition, trusting kind of like your gut with things. Within counseling, there's a thing called attunement, which is kind of, connecting with the person that you're sitting with and starting to kind of really understand what their needs are based on them identifying it, but also kind of like reading the room. And so she talks a lot about, whether it is spirit guides, whether it is spirituality, whether it is trusting your intuition or your gut or whatever else is there. She has a lot of great books and knowledge around that. So I've kind of been diving into Sonia Choquette around like ask your spirit guides or trust your intuition or trust your vibes, all that kind of stuff, just to kind of get more for myself and my clients in that realm.
So, you're kind of a doctor. You talked about getting into marine biology and being a vet. Seeing all the blood and guts is one thing, but there's an invisibility factor to it. There's a lot of trauma that you're dealing with. And how do you balance that? What gets you up every day to balance seeing heavy stuff, helping people through it, but being cognizant that you're a human being that needs to evolve and develop and heal yourself? How do you find that balance and do that every day?
Yeah, and so there's an interesting quote that I'm not even sure who said it, but this idea of like when you go to work and it doesn't feel like work, that's how you know you're on the right path. And I really do love what I do. And yes, there's a lot of heaviness, but then at the end of the day, when someone smiles and gets relief, and that happens in a space that I could hold and share with them, that is so meaningful. We're all gonna have, unfortunately, people that we love pass away. We're all gonna have, at some point in our life, probably witness something that doesn't feel good to see. And that's part of being a human being, right? It's not always, rainbows and sunshine. Like there is trauma related to all of our lives. And that's kind of how I approach everyone is that, this trauma-informed lens that we've all been through something. And that's why the kindness factor is so important. We never know what someone's going through that day. So yes, there's a lot of heaviness that comes into my office. But with that being said, too, there's a lot of like releasing. I do my best not to hold anyone else's trauma, not to hold anyone else's, bad day. I do a lot of self-care strategies, whether it is my own movement, getting outside, walking, being in nature. I find a lot of joy through, I have a dog right now and she's adorable and she brings me so much joy just kind of seeing her, just live life, right? Just shake it off and just get back up and run around and all that kind of great stuff. I have really great supporting people in my life. I travel. So I kind of like I brought in what I know feels good for me and this idea that I go to work when it doesn't feel good, that's my sign of, hey, I need to kind of switch something up. But right now, I absolutely love what I do. And yeah, it kind of, I keep learning more to keep bringing more amazing tools to my clients. And with that being said, I'm not responsible for anyone to kind of recover or heal or get better. That's all the individual that I'm sitting with who does the work. So if I can support them to get there, that's a great day's job for me.
So, no matter who we are, and if we've gone through trauma in our lives, Is there ever a point where you can relent and you don't have to continue to focus on it? You can say, all right, I've dealt with it. I'm healed enough. I can move on. Or is therapy something that's like a lifelong thing? You never quite get over it. What's your philosophy on that idea?
I also love that question. So, the whole point of a counselor is to kind of meet with someone where they're at in that moment and then work with them to kind of find the strategies to not need a counselor. So, my job is to convince people that they don't need a counselor.
Yeah.
Because, people at the end of the day know what's best for them. People at the end of the day know what they need. And people usually know what they need to do. It's just kind of getting there that the trouble is. When people come to counseling for, triggers or PTSD or trauma, that is a little bit different, and there's a lot of amazing strategies. So I've been using a lot of EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and that really helps when people are stuck on a trauma or people are stuck on a memory and they can't get past it. People often talk about rumination, which means like ongoing, repetitive, negative thoughts. Rumination can be positive, but it's often negative, and that's kind of where counseling will really be helpful. Is that people can't get over something, and that's something that sometimes it is a neural pathway where we're kind of not forming other connections in our brain and we kind of keep revisiting the trauma. A metaphor that I use a lot to talk about EMDR is imagining your brain as kind of, having this forest and you keep kind of circling this one tree. And that's kind of what you've developed as your daily routine as you wake up and you think about that tree and then you kind of go to work and you think about that tree. And that really is what trauma might feel like, right? It keeps popping up. EMDR kind of looks to solder over that path to the tree. So then you're kind of looking for new trees. And that's the neat part about trauma and in our lives is that we're going to have memories. We're going to have a ton of amazing memories and a ton of probably not so amazing memories. Where we focus is kind of what we'll think about. So if we can kind of find, distraction or techniques to kind of move it to something else, it's possible to kind of control your thoughts. And we often forget that, hey, I have the power to think about, a beautiful beach that I've been to, or I could think about the worst day of my life over and over again.
Yes.
Sometimes the emotional charge is addictive to think about the negative, but we want to kind of, bring it back to what feels good.
So when you think about your professional life more specifically, it there's risks that are involved with us. We have to take risks to get to where we want in life.
Mhm.
What's the biggest risk that you've ever had to take in your life?
Yeah, I think I move a lot. And so not I haven't moved lately, and this is kind of like for school. I grew up in a really small town that didn't have a lot of opportunities for education. So, right out of high school, I moved across country to Canada. And Canada's a very big country. If you don't know it, you can't drive one side or the other. Like it really takes a while to get there. And when I left, my mom, who was my biggest supporter. I really kind of did that whole like spread my wings and fly away across country. So that was scary. That was new. But I also think that was so, nothing good comes from being in your comfort zone. And so I think, having those big risks is really where you get that reward. And so I moved across the country, did it for a couple of years, definitely developed independence. And then the big risk was to move back and then continue education and then, to keep moving. And right now, as I mentioned, I live in Williams Lake, British Columbia, which if you look it up, 10,000 people. So once again, a very small city. Did not plan to stay here, moved here, really was just going to have it as a stepping stone. I had a different plan for my life. And then I met my husband in Williams Lake. And so I could have never predicted where it went. Definitely would not have changed a thing, but it was not what I planned. And that's kind of the pivoting part too, where even if you think you have the best planned out future, things happen and just to trust the good and trust, that the world is not against us. Trust that, whatever is out there is working to have us a better life and just trust that when you listen to kind of that little inside voice, it's going to pay off in the end.
So let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into that version of you that was going to move out of your small town and go see the world. And you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've gained. What advice would you impart on that young version of you?
Yeah, and definitely this idea of trust, and I keep going back to trust your inside voice, but really trust your intuition and know that, whatever does come at you, like you are gonna get through it. And that's, this idea of like this too shall pass, whether that's like a mantra that people walk through life with is, on the worst days, like it will get better. And even on the best days, it won't stay that way forever. And so just acknowledging that life is ups and downs, like this idea of a roller coaster. Sometimes the things that scare us and that are the hardest are actually the ones that we need to get through to actually feel good and feel better and get that kind of confidence through it. I do teach at a university where students are going through the practicum, and practicum is the hardest part where they're trying out their careers, they're just learning their new skills, and a lot of them are just like, I don't even want to be in this field, and they're just having all these second doubts, and it's a really scary big time. Just keep going is kind of what I encourage, and this idea that the roller coaster is the best part of life too, is when you're feeling like horrible and that you can't keep going or that you're overwhelmed. Notice that because when you're through it, it feels so good to recognize that, hey, I kept going and that matters. So if you're having like, when I tell my younger self, like as bad as it gets, it's gonna get better. And if you can kind of just remember that this too shall pass, you can make it through anything.
So, of everything that you've done, accomplished, and evolved into, what are you the proudest of?
Well, I feel like I'm still going. I feel like I still have more things that I want to accomplish. So I
Yep.
can't just define it just yet, but it's definitely always been something that I've wanted to write books. My mother is an author, and that's kind of, on her journey and just the human being that she's developed into. I feel like that's, something that I'm really, really proud of. I set my mind to write a book, and not only did I write one, I wrote two, so that's kind of amazing. And also the idea of some things I have to come. And so one thing when I was in school, I've always really wanted to like make a theory to add to the world so that people can kind of have another tool that helps people heal and grow moving forward. And so right now I am in the process of I submitted a proposal for the research ethic board to kind of do some research around integrating yoga, neural pathway with bilateral stimulation, hypnotherapy, and then positive psychology. So it's this big, huge project around using yoga and using a lot of affirmations and positive, power poses to kind of bring up safety and stability in people.
So, what was the book growing up for you? What was your favorite book that really
Oh my
kind of
gosh. It's
opened the
a
door?
great book. I think it's no, I'm gonna Dr. Now I forget the title of it. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor
Okay.
Frankl. Such a
Yeah.
good book. It is such a simple story, but such an empowering story where it's like if you have purpose, you can get through anything. And it kind of gives you a lot of really great little things. Another great book is something called Embraced by the Light by Betty J. Eddy. And I don't know why these books are coming up all of a sudden, but that book is a really great book as well, just to kind of have faith in that something good is coming.
Yeah. So, Cindy, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone around you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I was born as a C-section and basically I was born as a very underweighing baby and this zest for life is something that I woke up crying and I just keep fighting and I'm just so grateful to be alive and that's kind of what I want to run through life as, just a gratitude of being alive and just sharing what I can to others and improving others' lives before my time on this planet is done.
So, if anyone wants to get your books, they want to hire you, they want to reach out, they have questions, any of the good business, where can they go?
Yeah, and so there's so many things that social media does for us nowadays. Instagram, it's Cindi Saj, so CINDISAJ. I'm on Facebook. I do run a private counseling practice that's called Guidebook Consulting. So you can find guidebookconsulting.ca. I am in Canada. The two books, if you're looking for them, they're very simple to understand. It's called Finding Your Meaning, Finding Your Purpose. They're on Amazon, they're on Barnes and Noble. Luckily, they're kind of out there. So if you're looking for the books, and kind of, I like that you had mentioned they're easy to understand. So they really are written like not with all these big words. They're very kind of straightforward and easy to understand. Whether you're in grade, 4 or whether you're in, senior, they're gonna be good for everyone.
Good deal. Cindy, this has been great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.